Okay, so I thought we would move on. We're not going to do another sonnet. We're going to do a poem by Andrew Marvell called To His Coy Mistress. So Andrew Marvell's writing another version of a love poem, but this one is more satirical. So it is sort of making fun of or highlighting some of the ridiculous language that we find in traditional male love songs, and he's doing it with a sort of tongue-in-cheek way of describing how these male love poets sort of promise everything that they can, and they'll say anything just to sort of convince their ladies that their love is true. So we'll read through Andrew Marvell's To His Coy Mistress and try to do a sort of explication of this poem. Okay, so I'll just read it out loud for us. So to his coy mistress. Had we but world enough and time, this coyness, lady, were no crime. We would sit down and think which way to walk and pass our love-long stay. Thou by the Indian Ganges side shouldst rubies find, I by the tide of Humber would complain. I would love you 10 years before the flood, and you should, if you please, refuse till the conversion of the Jews. My vegetable love should grow vaster than empires and more slow, and 100 years should go to praise thine eyes and on thy forehead gaze, 200 to adore each breast, but 30,000 to the rest. An age at least to every part, and the last age should show your heart. For a lady, you deserve this state, nor would I love at lower rate. But at my back I always hear Time's winged chariot hurrying near, and yonder all before us lie deserts of vast eternity. Thy beauty shall no more be found, nor in thy marble vault shall sound my echoing song. Then worms shall try that long preserved virginity, and your quaint honor turn to dust, and into ashes all my lust. The grave's a fine and private place, but none, I think, do there embrace. Now, therefore, while thy youthful hue sits on thy cheek like morning dew, and while thy willing soul transpires at every pore with instant fires, now let us sport us while we may, and now, like amorous birds of prey, rather at once our time devour, than languish in his slow-chapped power. Let us roll all our strength and all our sweetness up into one ball, and tear our pleasures with rough strife through the iron gates of life. Thus, though we cannot make our sun stand still, yet we will make him run. So the first thing that we can do if we were analyzing this poem is to identify the speaker and the auditor. In this case, our speaker is another male speaker who is trying to woo or court a lady. In this case, that is evident in our title, so to his coy mistress. The auditor is the mistress who is playing it coy. So if you don't know the definition of a word, such as being coy, you should definitely look that up. If I were writing about this text, this poem, I would want to realize or define coyness and understand what that meant, because that will help us understand the poem. Essentially, the mistress, the woman that he is trying to woo, is playing it sort of hard to get. That's what it sort of means to play coy. And she's being sort of shy and reserved, and he's trying to convince her how much he loves her and really trying to sort of seduce her in a way, right? So he's saying everything he can to sort of convince her that he loves her and that they should not waste one more moment talking. They should just, get to the business at hand and again embrace the moment and live in the moment. So this is often referred to as a Carpe Diem poem, and Carpe Diem means seize the day. So rather than being shy or reserved or playing hard to get, the speaker is asking the woman to seize the day, live in the moment, don't think about consequences, just go with your feelings. And he wants her to act on her desires, and essentially uh, he's asking her to sort of make love with him. So we have this premise of this romantic poem, the speaker trying to sort of seduce a lady, and that's his sort of motive in writing the poem, the speaker. And we have three distinct stanzas, so there's sort of three parts of his argument. It's a monologue, right? So it's all one single speaker, and he's addressing this female auditor. So we can look more closely at each stanza and what it's trying to convey. So stanza 1 is sort of giving us the basic premise of the poem. The very first lines, had we but world enough and time, this coyness lady were no crime. So he's saying if we had all the time in the world, we could sort of have a long drawn out courtship. I would, admire and sort of pay you more attention, and we could sort of pass our days long and apart from one another, and it wouldn't matter. You could play hard to get, and again, my love for you would grow and grow as long as we were around. So that's the basic premise. He said, if I have all the time in the world, we could take things slow. He would take his time in courting her. And this, if they had time, this wouldn't be a problem. But that's where we get to the second stanza. And he's saying it is a problem because time is always passing us by. So second stanza, this is the problem with that scenario. He says, but at my back I always hear time's winged chariot hurrying near. So time here is being personified as somebody in a chariot that's always sort of chasing them. And he's saying, well, you can't play coy and you can't take forever because time is always passing and we have to sort of live in the moment. You don't want to grow old and lose your beauty and still have your sort of honor turned to dust. So he's talking about her virginity, and she's sort of, you don't want to get old and again miss your opportunities for pleasure while you're young and beautiful. So that's the second part of second stanza. So he's really just saying we don't have all the time in the world. Time is chasing us. Soon we will be old and dead. You don't really want to die a virgin, do you? So let's again embrace the moment and live in the now. And then stanza 3 is the sort of solution to this scenario, his solution. So he's saying, now, therefore, while we're still young and beautiful, let's live in the moment and follow our desires and, again, make love, essentially. So his solution is, while we're still young, let's have a good time, let's live in the moment and make love, because this is the only thing that really matters while we're alive on earth, and we can make this moment last, so it'll feel like we're living forever in this beauty of this moment. So he's really presenting his argument and trying to convince this female auditor that she should follow along and seize the day and give in to his request that they make love. So he's very convincing in his romantic, persuasive language. And it's really sort of a satire of all those love poems that we just read where they promise the world, right? They promise eternal love. And here we have the speaker, a male speaker, who's just really essentially just having an extended pickup line and doing it in a way that's very poetic and beautiful, but at the same time it's just, again, a typical pickup line that you could hear at the bar on a Saturday night, right? So he's trying to convince her to come home with him. So once we know the basic premise of the poem, we know what it's about, we can look more closely at how the author is conveying some of these ideas through poetic devices. So in our first stanza, I think we should do it stanza by stanza and look at some examples of the language and imagery being used by the poet. So for instance, we have some allusions to the Bible, for one. So the flood refers to the biblical flood. So this we have a sort of an example of an allusion. So I've sort of highlighted in red some of the allusions that are present in the first part. So he's saying, had we time and all the time in the world, this would not be a problem. You could walk and pass every day on your side, which is the Indian Ganges side, and you could look for rubies. You could just pass your day doing whatever you want, pretty much. And then he's saying, I, by the tide of Humber, would complain. So if you look on a map, you can see the Ganges and Humber are very far apart. So if you know anything about, again, the distance between the Humber and Ganges, I mean, it's miles and miles apart. Humber is in Britain, Ganges in India. So their separation is very much exaggerated. We have a hyperbole here, and the speaker's saying he wouldn't mind as much, but he would complain about the distance, and he would still love you even if they were apart and distant from one another, so they could have a long term romance. And then he says, I would love you 10 years before the flood, and you should, if you please, refuse to the conversion of the Jews. So he's making some biblical allusions here, and also hyperbole when he's promising, sort of exaggerating how much he would love her, and he wouldn't mind having this long drawn out courtship. And the flood being a biblical reference to sort of the Genesis and sort of the creation of the world, and then the conversion of the Jews is his sort of reference of sort of resurrection, and it's his way of saying he would love you 10 years before the flood, so even before creation all the way to the end of time. So the conversion of the Jews is sort of a future event that hypothetically marks the end of time. So he's very much making these gross exaggerations, large exaggerations of how much he would love her, and he wouldn't mind having this long drawn out courtship. And then he uses what we call a conceit, so a metaphor that's very sort of bizarre, and he's describing his love as a vegetable. So he's saying, my vegetable love should grow vaster than empires and more slow. So it's a conceit is just a unusual metaphor that was used by this group of metaphysical poets, which Marvell was one of. So he's sort of suggesting his love will grow like a vegetable grows, and there's sort of some innuendo in there as well. And then he goes on to sort of catalog all her sort of physical attributes. So he talks about her eyes, her forehead, each breast, and he's saying, I will devote time, hundreds of years, if I had the time, to each part of your body and sort of adore each part as long as we were alive. So if I had all the time in the world, I would do all this. And then the last 100 years would be spent towards her heart, and 30,000 years for all the rest of her. So again, had he had time, he would praise every single part of her, but the fact is they don't have the time.